Hi, everyone. Happy Wednesday. Okay, so I feel like we're at a place where everything is starting to settle down. We're having some clarity. I think our hearts have been opened, our minds are opened. We're starting to see where we need to pause, where we need to listen a little bit more, where we need to lean in. Where we need to make some changes in our life. I know for myself, I'm just even looking just in my small life first and saying, where can I be more mindful? Where can I be more evolved? Where can I make a difference? Because when we make a difference, even small ones, it ripples out into the world. And then, of course, it's like we're processing, we're digesting, we're figuring out where we can even contribute on a bigger level. So it's starting to feel like a lot of hopefulness, a lot of possibility. It's like I could feel that there's a change coming, a change of transformation. And with that word, transformation, I am so excited to talk today to a very dear friend, a colleague, David Harris, because this man, he lives the epitome of everything that we've been talking about for the last 2 months. He is it. He embodies transformation, pivot, reinvention. So first we're going to do our big, deep healing breaths so we can get ourselves anchored. Yes, grounded. And trust me, we want to be grounded, people, because Mercury is going retrograde tonight. And then Saturn is going retrograde on Friday. So please use these breaths. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, look it up because it makes things really turbulent. With Mercury going retrograde and Saturn going retrograde, we are literally in for something. So today we're going to do some big, deep grounding. Really see the earth pulling you down into the earth to ground you. Okay. So we're going to inhale for 4. You know the drill. Hold your breath for 5 and smile. And then we're going to exhale, ha. So we're going to inhale love. We're going to hold our breath. We're going to see that love going into every single cell in our body, vibrating us on a highest level of vibration. And then, ha, joy. Okay? 3 breaths. Let's go. Inhale love. Hold your breath and smile. Exhale, ha. Home. Inhale, love. Hold your breath. Smile. Exhale, ha. Pleasure, ha. Last one. Feel the earth pulling you into the ground. Hold your breath, smile. Exhale, pleasure, hum. Okay. I feel more grounded. All right. So I'm really, really, really excited about having this conversation today with Mr. David Harris. Okay. So I want to tell you a little bit about David. When I said to you, he is all about the pivot. I met David and he came to Equinox and he just left a well into 6-figure job. Very successful. He was in his, I believe, mid-30s, but he was passionate about fitness, personally passionate, and also curious and interested and had this desire to elevate the fitness industry. So he came to Equinox and he started as a trainer on the floor, making $8 an hour. Whew. That takes courage. That takes fearlessness. That takes believing in yourself in a really big way. But very quickly, he got promoted. And he got promoted because, honestly, I don't think we'd ever seen anyone come in and build their personal training business so quickly. His business was built. His schedule was completely full. Trust me, when you're the founder of a company, you're going to notice that level of success quick. So my brothers and I started talking to David and saying, how do you do this? And then the more conversations we had with him, we're realizing, wow, this guy is a born leader. He's got so much passion, so much drive, so much grit, so much determination, so much resilience. Like, this is who we need to help lead this, because it was a movement. Trust me, we were changing the industry. And David Harris went on to be the vice president of personal training for the company. And I really believe in my heart when I tell you this man made a huge contribution, not just to Equinox, which he made a huge one too, but to the industry as a whole. He was also the chairman of the Health and Advisory Board at Equinox. And this is a place where he educated and he mentored over thousands and thousands of young men and women. And a lot of these men and women went on to build their own very successful brands under David. And right on the top of this, he's had over 2 decades at Equinox. It was as if David said to himself, I'm going into the 3rd act of my life. Like, I'm ready for a change. Like, I'm not the person I was 20 years ago. I see more, I feel more. And he had the courage again, the same person with that courage and fearlessness to pivot at a stage where most people are not pivoting. Trust me when I tell you, most people at that level, they're holding on. They're waiting for the company to sell. They're waiting for their big cash out. Like, that's what most people are doing at that stage. But David, he's just like, I want to live my life to the fullest. I want to live my full potential. And he literally goes out and creates something again. And now he's created his own company where he's consulting. And the name of this company is Authenticite. And I love that name because the root of that is authentic. And we're going to get in there and talk about authenticity. And where he goes out and he works with companies and individuals on leadership and really helping you connect to the culture, the ethos, the energy, so that your people can actually have great successes and they're elevating each other and they're building each other up and they're listening. And at a time like now, we more than ever need to have this type of leadership where we're leaning in and we're listening and we're touching, moving, and inspiring people to connect to their gifts, to their greatness, to their purpose. And then how all of that creates huge successes within a company because people are walking in, they're alive, they're turned on, they are just there. The energy is all about being the best version of ourselves individually and as a group. That's where the magic happens. The real magic in business happens. And that's why I am so excited to talk with David Harris today. Hi, David, welcome.
Thank you for that intro, Lavinia. Super appreciated.
Well, it's the truth. I mean, there wasn't anything there that is not 100% truth. So, David, today we're going to talk about the pivot that you just did. Because, like I said, you were on the top of your game. You had built yourself up and went to the top of a corporate ladder. I mean, you basically can't get any higher as a VP of that area. And the reason I really want to start with that is because, 42 million people lost their jobs during this pandemic. And so many people are not choosing to pivot. They're going to have to pivot. So that's what these talks are all about, is how we can help people how we can help them fill up their toolbox so that they can feel powerful and have some clarity on how to do that. So that's why I think when we talk about this moment, like, what was the moment, or maybe it was a series of moments when you realized, you know what, I want something else for this third act of my life. Like, I really do. So take us through what that looks like.
Well, before I get into the specifics of that, I'm going to take you back a bit to a moment at 63rd in Lexington when we were working together. And I remember being like a workhorse in that club in those days. And I was very proud of the success we had all built there, because that was when Equinox really got on the map. That club just blew it up.
Yeah.
And it blew up personal training in particular. There had never been a culture like that. And I couldn't really take 100% credit for it, because in some ways I think some things are just the stars aligning, right? And I had these interviews with all these amazing trainers, and one after the other, I turned down one person. Everybody else I hired. And all of those people went on for many, many years. Some of them are still there.
Mm-hmm.
And it was just sort of heaven sent. But I remember working like a horse and just was so into the grind of it. And at some point, I think I began to exhibit that I wasn't really happy. And I remember you called me into the office and you said, David, you don't seem happy. Like, and we had this kind of heart to heart about whatever it was that I was exhibiting, which was probably burnout now in retrospect. And just, the fact that I really didn't have a personal life, and I think every human being, if people take something from this discussion, every human being has a right to a personal life and to something that gives their life more than work. Work is very important, but it is not everything. And if you're using work as a hideout, it's not a good thing. You need to cultivate a full life, because every person, in my view, deserves a full life. And that's turned into this kind of cliche of the work-life balance. And the reason that people say work-life balance is because there is no balance. Everybody works too much.
Right.
And because they're chasing dollars. And that can be very gratifying, and it can certainly feed our egos. But what happens in that trade-off is that we become starved on other levels, especially if we are people that have other levels to us. And so that happened to me, Lavinia, and I think you sort of pointed that out. So I tell that story to sort of set the stage for what I'm going to talk about here, which is when I had a much more severe pivot. And when we say that word pivot, I think a lot of people think, oh, that means I'm just going to turn and do something else, or I'm just sort of going to turn around and like change the whole story. And the reality is that you're always baking your next story underneath what you're doing. Your intentions are always there. And what's important is that you manifest those intentions in ways that are meaningful and are visible to you and to the world you want to interact with. And so for me, if I'm to be 100% honest here, my pivot actually began in 2013. And, they say that 3 of the most stressful things that happen in your life are the death of a loved one, the loss or change of a job, and a physical move. Well, I've done all three of those in the span of 7 years.
Mm.
And each one was not easy. Each one has been a process, but they're all three of them are definitely related. But the first one was really about the death of my late partner, who I loved tremendously. We had a home in Los Angeles. We had these wonderful dogs that we loved. And he died in December, only at the age of 51, after a long health struggle. And that shattered my world because I was trying to balance, having this high-powered job with this, with this very prominent company, and also trying to have a personal life. And that was very challenging. The personal life was on the West Coast, not the East Coast. So that presented logistical challenges at a time when the company was going through, the throes of the Great Recession, and there was a need to reinvent. And there were, I had to be that person that everyone wanted me to be, that I had been for so many years. And yet I was living through things that I wasn't sharing with anyone.
Mm.
And, I work with Simon Sinek, as you know, and part of Simon's ethos is about creating a safe space. And for people to feel like they can really be authentic and discuss what's really going on with them, they have to feel safe.
Right.
And that isn't always true in a lot of companies. And I'm not going to say that that wasn't true at Equinox, because there were avenues to do that. But I think when you work in something for so long and you expect kind of a deeper level of attention, and that may have been a little bit of unrealistic on my part, I don't really know, and I'm not going to judge that per se, but I will say that, what happened in that period was that my career became an anchor because everything else was destroyed.
Mm.
He died. I lost my home. I lost my 4 dogs that I had to opt out. I had to go through this whole thing. And then I had a tremendous injury, like a couple years later,
Remember that.
where I had this tremendous rupture to my quadricep tendon, and then I re-ruptured it the day after surgery and had to have the surgery again. And then I went through a very long period of rehab, and I suffered a severe, crippling bout of depression that a few didn't really know about. And, maybe it was obvious to some people, but it was extremely disabling.
Mm.
And talk about going through a dark night, I don't wish that on anyone, even people that I don't like, because it is so profoundly unsettling that you really have to decide if you want to keep going. And I don't know, some people haven't necessarily had to confront that, but I had to confront it. And so that initial thing that happened was such a big change for me. And I didn't think of it as a pivot at the time. It was a life event, nothing special about it other than that it happened to me. It happens to everyone at some point. And we all go through these things. The part of the human experience that is going to be universal is that we're born and that we die. We're not all going to have children. We're not all going to get married, but we sure as hell are going to be born, and we're going to die, and we're going to lose people we love. And those are tremendously taxing experiences. So going through that was huge. And then, I sort of had to reinvent my job within the company. And, I took on this role where I was sort of spearheading the thought leadership around science for the company. And that was a tremendous experience, because I got to work with people on a health advisory board that I had cultivated and brought in. And these were all hugely respected minds. And I was like, how did you land these people? Well, I'm a bit of a persistent sort. If
Yeah.
people who know me don't know that, I'm a little bit of a dog with a bone. When I have a vision, I want to see that vision to the end. And I felt very, very clearly that these people needed to be together and having these discussions about how to take fitness and wellness into the realm of prevention and into the realm of how do we guard our health? How do we come better psychologically, physically, motivationally, and then as far as personal trainers are concerned, I felt this commitment very early on that was the best profession ever. And it's the best profession ever because they're transforming people's lives. They're intimately involved with what people are doing, and they have conversations that no one else, no other professional will have with a person. And sometimes their clients see them more than they see their own spouses. There's stuff that comes out, but there's this alchemy that occurs between a really great trainer, coach, and a client that creates a bond that I think is very unique. And the trainer and coach becomes a role model. They become a teacher. They become a philosopher. They become a guidepost. The best, and this is why I think this is truly what I think is complementary between being a good psychologist and being a coach. Some people will say, oh, my trainer's my shrink. And that comes out in kind of the worst way, because it really shouldn't come out that way. But really, what a good shrink does is they allow you the space to become the best of who you are. Mm-hmm. And I am incredibly proud that I created an environment that gave the coaches the framework to be able to do that, to be able to step back and let their clients take center stage, and to create the environment for their success. So, but then having to give all of that up after having put so much energy into that was another change for me. And it was huge. And quite honestly, the company was going in a different direction. I was going in a different direction, and we respectfully parted ways, and that was fine. But it was really right at that moment when all that was going on, my brother died. And that was another huge pivot point, and it happened as I was exiting the company. And it was shattering because I found out, and I had to tell all of my siblings. I had to fly to Ohio and tell my parents. My brother was a bit of a recluse, an extremely brilliant person, but a recluse. So, I was dealing with his death and exiting this company at the same time. And then in the midst of all of that, I had started to think about the next chapter. I didn't want to live in New York anymore, and I didn't want to be in California, two places that I had spent so much time of my professional life and cultivated friendships on both coasts. And, I started to go to Montana because I had dear friends there, and I started spending a lot of time there. And, before thinking about moving there, I said, you know what, I'm going to take a month of every season, and I'm going to really immerse myself in that culture. I don't know anybody here, but I'm going to get to know people. And I loved it. I loved being by myself. I loved going for these incredibly long bike rides. I loved doing hiking. I loved doing fly fishing. I loved doing, all these things that I had never had the time to do before. And at the same time, I was thinking about how could I be more useful from a professional angle, and where's my expertise really sit at this point? And I felt that a lot of it had to do with this shedding of an identity that I had before, that I had held on to, but wasn't really indicative of the real me, and thus the name of the company that I wanted to create. And my work with Simon Sinek, which is very grounded in this idea of how do we find authentic expression. And I had brought Simon and his team into Equinox in my last 2 years, and we exposed 1,000 trainers to the why process, which was very rich for them. And I saw how it affected them. I saw how it was bringing them back to life. The company had huge objectives business-wise, but I know that sometimes for coaches and trainers, that impetus, you're not always inspired by money or the next thing. You need sometimes to find out what's going on for you. And having experienced that with you in that office in 1999, I had another reflection point, like 20 years later, that these people needed that same inspiration. So why not bring in the guru around that? And so after I left Equinox, I began working in partnership with Simon, delivering his message globally to companies, and doing it now online because of the COVID crisis. And that's been very interesting. So many people, we have these classes that are 200 people classes. And so it's been very enriching to step into that world. And then in the middle of all this, I decided to formally move to Montana. So the movers came to my house yesterday and picked everything up and shipped it out west. And being a dog lover, I've gotten this wonderful dog that's going to come to me in July. His name is Wyatt. He's a fox red Labrador, and he's stunning. And I'm just so happy to be able to do that, and to be able to operate from a position of what's truly authentic. But I had to go through a lot of hell and soul searching, honestly, to make that happen. And it was not easy.
David, I'm really, first of all, thank you so much for sharing so authentically and so vulnerably, because I went through that. Like, I understand that whole, like, I remember when we sold Equinox, I I kept waiting for that feeling. You know, I thought now that I had so much money, I'm never going to have to worry about money again and yada, yada. I just thought every day I was going to feel so like elated and so happy. But the truth is, I went the complete opposite. I felt so lost and scared. I didn't know who I was without this identity. And also, like, even what you talked about in the beginning, you know, I also didn't cultivate a real personal life, even though I had a child and, you know, I had a partner, but everything was equinox, 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 you know. That's where all my focus was. And when we sold, I was even a little bit lost. Like, I didn't cultivate a lot of the friendships with people outside of Equinox, people who I had in the past, you know, because I was just, everything was my like tunnel vision on everything to do with Equinox. So I understand that loss. And then, you know, again, I was at the bottom of the snake pit. I was depressed. And this is a person who I never experienced depression ever in my life. You know, I'm the one, and you know, but what I love about it is, not love about it, but now that I'm on the other side of it, I can say love. But because, and you know, you and I are the same age, like, because now we're starting this third act, like, and everything's out. Like, we've got to see the dark side of ourselves, and we got to do the deep dive and do the work, so that there's something so freeing and liberating when you've really kind of experienced that. Like, I remember the second time you had your injury, I don't remember if I text you or what. I
You
said,
did text me.
I
That
texted
was very powerful.
I said, David, usually when you injure your legs or your hips, um, in Eastern medicine, I mean in Eastern medicine, they say you could be confused, like there could be some doubt on your future. Like, you have to look at, okay, what's going on here? Because there's a doubt on how I'm moving forward. You're stuck. Like, very often when we injure our hips or our legs, those are the things that propel us forward. And especially the second time, like the first time you had it, I kind of knew that in my sense. And I thought, but you know what, that's how we, you know, usually our breakdowns create our breakthroughs. But the second time I was like, okay, I have to reach out to him and let him know, you know, very often it's that we're just not in harmony with how we're moving forward in our life. You just may want to evaluate this. And you wrote me back and you said, I think I need to do that. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, like, you know, we get the signs, you know, very often we're getting little signs. But, you know, so often, I'm not going to say we're stuck, but often we're in a rhythm, we're in a routine. You know, that's why it takes a lot of courage. Like, and I think the other thing, what I'm hearing is like, the way I've always seen you and worked with you and just understood you to be, like, you're a person that has a lot of core values. Like, you live by your core values. You're very grounded in them. And very often in business, at times, we could be in a situation where, or not just in business, it could be in our relationships with our family of origin, our relationships with friends, where all of a sudden, like, there's things that are percolating around our core values that are not really aligned. Mm-hmm. And it's like, okay, how do I navigate this? You know, because we always have to compromise. There's always a little bit of a dance, right? Mm-hmm. With a little bit of a dance. And then at some point it's like, oh, you know what? This is just a little too much. Like, I have to compromise too much in my soul, my essence, in order to fit into this box. So, I mean, could you talk a little bit about that? Because I talk so much about core values and really for people, because I believe that's one of the ways that you actually find your lane, or as I say, your lane finds you. Because when you're living in your core values and you're living in your truth, real truth, then it's sort of, and you're showing up and you're working hard and you're diligent and you're doing what you're supposed to be doing. You're creating good behavioral patterns, and you have a plan, and you're working your plan. And when you're doing all that stuff and you're in your values and you're in your groove, it all just kind of happens.
Right.
But very often when we're not, when we're trying to make something work that really kind of goes against our grain, goes against our heart, our soul. But I say a lot of people don't connect with that because the goals that people usually have are so monetary that they're not even thinking about their core values. It's like, you know what, if I have to lie to fit in here, I'll lie. If I have to cheat, like if I have to throw somebody under the bus, I'll do, you know, like it becomes very selfish. And those are the, you know, organizations that I walk into sometimes, and it's like you can almost feel it. Like I'll go into a meeting and they'll bring me in as a consultant, and I'll meet with the team, and I usually get there a little bit early and see how the team's talking, and we're talking. Then all of a sudden the leader comes in and everybody gets quiet. I watch them, their body language changes. It's as if everybody just flattened out. They went flatline. And I'm thinking, no, like for me, when the leader walks in, you want them to even see more alive, more on point, not go into this like flatlining. And I want to scream sometimes because I'm like, people, you're out of your values right now. You're out of your core values. Like, what's going on here? So talk a little bit about that. And because that's what you're really working on now, helping people to create those environments that are keeping people all alive and authentic and collaborating with each other. And, you know.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, to tell you the truth, over the last 3 to 5 years, I felt that the path that actually the entire country was on was utterly unsustainable. You know, we were celebrating, you know, the stock market that was huge, that really didn't correlate to Main Street. It correlates to liquidity in the market. A lot of it infused by the government to create these numbers that are kind of artificial, don't really correlate to the Main Street or to the Main Street worker. And then you have people working constantly. You have some people, you know, working 2 and 3 jobs, you know. I was fortunate not to be in a position to do that. I think a lot of people in New York City do not have to do that, especially if they have corporate jobs. They're insulated. And there's a whole world in New York City that is insulated from the reality of what most people in this country have to live. And so they get very insulated by their perks and their little world and all the things that is them. But that's really like a tiny, tiny percent of the world. And so I think the world was moving at warp speed. And, you know, it when COVID happened, it was like a huge break on the whole thing.
Yeah.
And I think it allowed everyone to sit back and reevaluate. I found it very interesting that everyone was stuck at home, and, you know, no one could go to the gym, and everyone, you know, and no one could go out to restaurants, and no one could see their friends. They had to deal with themselves at home in an isolated environment and with their family or their loved ones, whoever it was that they were with. But they were extremely cut off. You know, here in New York, we had to go to grocery stores and stand online, and, you know, it was unheard of, like all this stuff. And then, you know, I traveled around the city during this period, and I took a lot of pictures of the city that were just, you know, when it was dead, just isolated. And I don't think the world has ever seen New York City look like that. Right. It was like a ghost town, something out of the Twilight Zone. So but yet something miraculous started to happen around us. The air suddenly got really clear. And I think the science was out there that there had been like a 25 to 30% drop in emissions. You know, even the canals in Venice had started to clear.
Yeah.
You know, the world was taking this deep breath and basically saying, look at this. Yeah. Thank you, and look at what is in front of you. And you need to be taking this into your own DNA and doing your own reflection about what is actually happening. And so, but behind the scenes, I think a lot of companies and a lot of businesses are struggling to reinvent, trying to figure out what does the landscape look like in this new world that may be partially digital, part live. You know, they may need to pivot between both rather rapidly. You know, it's still very unclear as to how all of this is ultimately going to play out. But I think we should we should be thankful for that rest period, because it allowed us to make connections again to people. And I think the fact that people were actually reaching out and having conversations on Skype calls or phone calls, and people they hadn't talked to in years, they were suddenly talking to, just having conversation. And, conversation is really a lost art. I remember growing up and we had conversations around the table. We weren't interrupted by phones.
Mhm.
People had opinions and you differed, and there were, but that was the art of making relationships work. And I think some of that has been lost in this era we're in. And so I think this need to find ourselves in this new air was a real gift. And I just hope people used it constructively to really reflect on their lives, where they are, what's important for them, so that when they decide to move forward again, they have their personal boundaries, and they know they are able to reflect on their values and those things that are most central to them, not the company they work for, but to them. And how can they, what is negotiable and what is non-negotiable? And I think it's important that every person have that list.
I mean, I agree with you because everything starts with self. Everything starts with self-love, self-respect. And when you have clarity there and you start creating behaviors that are around that, and behavioral patterns that are around that self-care, self-love, self-reflection, all of a sudden, then you connect to other people better. You connect
Right.
to opportunities better because you have clarity on who you are. You have
Right.
clarity on the essence, the soul, the way you really feel. And that's energy that lives inside of us. And when people are vibrating at that vibration of energy, it's like then you bring in things that have that same quality. And before
Yes.
you know it, you're having conversations that you never thought you would be having, only because you've got clarity on who you are. You start really seeing
Yes.
things that aren't serving your highest good, things that you're doing out of guilt or out of duty or out of what you think you need to do to fit into society. Or all of a sudden this pandemic kind of made everybody reset. Like,
Mm-hmm.
we're going back to a reset. We're going to actually
Mm-hmm.
stop all the engines, and it's
Mm-hmm.
giving you time to be a little bored. I used to always tell my son, when my son would come up to me, Mommy, I'm bored, when he was a little kid. And I loved that because I
Right.
knew if I let him be bored a little bit, he'd start being creative. But
Right.
if I gave him something to do, then I was actually taking away his creativity. Because if I
Yes.
let him just wallow in that boredom for a little bit, the next thing you know, he would go and he would get his paints and he would start painting. Sometimes he would paint things that I would be like, I can't believe he's painting his snowboard right now.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, but there was some beauty in that. And that's kind
Mm-hmm.
of where we are today. It's like, if you're a little bit bored, because it's interesting that you said we're connecting, because I've heard a lot of people feel like they're not connecting because what they're not
Mm-hmm.
realizing with is you're not connecting to all the disturbances that you used to stay that kept you busy, like those
Right.
to-do lists. But
Right.
though half of the times there's nothing on that list that is really that meaningful because
Mm-hmm.
it's not really connecting to you. So
Yeah.
really, it's like what you're connecting to first is self. And then it gives you time, like, oh my gosh, I'll see somebody on Facebook and I'll be like, I haven't seen them in 20 years. I'm going to call them or I'm going to DM them. Where before I wouldn't have even thought about that. I would have saw their
Mm-hmm.
Facebook, I would have hit a like and I would have moved on. Who had the time to actually make the phone call and connect with somebody from 25 years ago?
Mm-hmm.
So it's really is a really interesting time.
Yeah, and and honestly, I would be remiss if I didn't say, it was very interesting because in the middle of all of that, I had started a project back in February where I was looking at the Jim Crow period in American history, and I was posting these stories of people who had died from lynching, which is part of Americans' history, and I I was inspired to do that because I had begun reading about these people, and I thought, so many people die and no one knows that they existed. No one knows that they had lives, and they died brutally. And actually, it was some research on the Ukraine that caused me to do this. I was looking at a very famous episode that had happened in World War II called Babi Yar, where 100,000 Jews were murdered and thrown into a ravine.
Mm.
And I thought, those people were thrown into a grave and nobody knows anything about their identity. And then it got me reflecting during Black History Month, which I call American History Month. And I started looking at that, and I started thinking, let's start looking at these stories. So I decided, initially in February, I was going to post one story a month, right? But it's actually extended because I decided to keep it going. And when I found out that over 4,000 people had died this way in very unique circumstances and really tied to our nation's history, I just found it so, and initially when I started posting these, some people wrote me, why are you doing this now during a pandemic? And then what happens in the middle of the pandemic?
Yeah.
You have three things happen. Breonna Taylor, you have Ahmaud Arbery, and you have George Floyd, all in succession. And it was like, there it all is, the same story again.
Yeah.
And it was like, and in the case of George Floyd, it was 9 minutes of watching that. And I just thought that was so powerful and interesting that should happen in the middle of a pandemic. And I thought, well, here's another sign that we should be looking deeper at stories, at people's stories. And this particular group has a very particular story, but there are so many stories out there to different groups that have been historically oppressed or marginalized that need to come out because they're part of the American story. And I think we're now being challenged to tell the full American story.
Mm-hmm.
And that includes women's suffrage, it includes gay rights, it includes African Americans, it includes the immigrant story. It includes so much that has not been discussed. And so the fact that during this breath of air that we took during COVID, we had to inhale that and digest it. I thought, there are no mistakes.
Yeah.
And I was very moved by that because I felt like it started conversations that people didn't want to have, and yet that they really need to have, because I honestly believe that 80% of the people out there are not intentionally, bad people that want to hurt people racially. Yeah, I think there are people that do that just out of ignorance. They don't know. And so it's a chance to get to know your neighbor. It's a chance to get to have a conversation. It's a chance to learn about a person and their history that maybe you didn't know. And remove the judgment, find out the person. And I've been caught in a couple of traps online where I made a judgment and somebody called me out and I said, you know what, I'm sorry, you're absolutely right. And I think it's important to not presume things about people and their stories. And so that is another part of what builds this communal understanding, is this ability to listen and really want to hear each other's story. And I think storytelling is so important because when you bring the stories down to their root level, people have much more in common than they have different. But they have to go through the process of wanting to hear those.
That's actually my next question for you about, you always talk about storytelling. And I know even in part of the way you do consulting is helping people to really connect to their personal story, which through that connection of their personal story really helps them to start revealing some things about themselves and their authentic self, their purpose, their core values. And explain to us a little bit about that process, then helps you actually become a better person.
Right. Well, this was something that I started with, that I began this work with Simon Sinek, where we were helping people find their why. And for people who haven't been through the process of finding their why, a lot of people think they kind of know their why, and usually it's their what and their how. It's not really their why. Your why is rooted in a very deep place having to do with your history. You have to go back and turn over some stones and look at some stuff. And you'll look at, and what we help people do is work through that process to connect to that. Why is that important? Well, it's important because it's suggestive of your actions. It's suggestive of your intentions, not a utilitarian end of how is this going to help me do my job better. No, how is it going to help you be better? as a person, as an individual, as an active force in the world. And from that, you may get to how do you do your job better.
Right.
But if you view it strictly as a utilitarian thing, you're going to miss the whole thing.
Yeah.
It's really about you. And you started this conversation by talking about values. And I think that that's what this process does. It helps distill those values to a point that's very unmistakable. And once you see it, you can't ignore it. Now you want to act from that. And I have to tell you, the act of actually discovering mine, which wasn't necessarily surprising, but I was interested in how I got to that through those stories. I have wanted to live the fidelity of that through all of my actions going forward. And it is informed. And from that, I have begun to see new things flower that I didn't imagine 3 years ago.
Mm-hmm. That is really freeing. And you and I had this conversation the other day when I said to you, you know, David, my story hasn't changed at all since I'm 34 years old, like at all. When I had that moment of clarity, it was like, bam. And you said, yes, Lavinia, because you found your why and you live your why. And of course, I haven't done Simon's work, but I have done, you know, probably enough work. I always say to probably have 2 or 3 doctorates for the amount of hours and work that I have out there in different workshops and certifications and everything. But because that, you know, really understanding emotional health, mental health, psychological health, spiritual health, and physical health, and how all of those things are threaded in. And not one is more important than the other. I mean, probably for me, I would say for me now at the place of where I am in my life, I would say my spiritual health is something that I connect to. Like that's the thing I check in with every day. Like every single day, I have to put a little bit more energy there and a little bit more time to just, because the world, we're moving so fast, we're plugged in 24/7. We're like, so I have to constantly pull back and I have a lot of energy. Like I have a lot of energy. I love people. My husband calls me a little bumblebee that I just love to go and go and go and create and, you know, and every phone call, it's so funny. He said to me yesterday, man, every single phone call, it turns out that you're actually giving people, giving them advice on how they can make more money or build their business or whatever. You know, my mind just goes that way. Like sometimes I wish I could shut it off. Like today even, I go to Coffee Bean to get my coffee. I'm actually up in Palo Alto, so I'm not home. And I'm sitting there for a second. And the next thing I know, without even thinking, I'm counting how many people online, and I'm thinking about 10 ways that they could have been more efficient, how they could be making more money, and how they could have better customer service. And I'm going, stop. Lavinia, this isn't your business. You don't need to make everybody's business more efficient, more customer service, better product, better content. So, but it's because I love it. Like, it's my lane, you know, it's your lane. And I think when you have that, at times you do have to conserve. Like I have to have discernment about not, because I'm the kind of person that could clearly work 24 hours and I just keep getting sourced by it. Like I get sourced, I get more energy until you burn out, because that's why you burn out, because you really can't. You could be sourced for so long and then you can't get out of bed. So for me, I have to always check back into that, my soul, you know.
And I think that that's really important. I mean, you know, to me, the beauty of Simon's process is that it really distills it into language. It distills something into language that you haven't put into language. And for me, when I found mine, which was to carve a path forward to leave a legacy of self-empowerment for future generations, that really rang to me, because I realized I had been doing that work for so long. I'd been working to build careers and career paths for people that, you know, the world they didn't fit into the world. And I wanted to create a lane that would allow these people to fit into the world and stand up for themselves and have some self-respect. and to achieve something for themselves, because that's what I had done, because I felt like I didn't fit into any particular lane, and I didn't want to really fit into a lane. But when the opportunity presented itself to create that lane, I wanted to create it. But it wasn't just for me; it was for it was for other people. And now being, older, and really having the same energy level that I had at 30, I don't feel any big difference. Maybe at some point I will, but I feel more sharply focused on that than ever before, because now I've been able to distill it to its essence and really figure out how can, through the actions that I do every day, advance that cause. How can I bring that to life in the world in a way that is meaningful? And I think it comes from a very personal place. I don't have children. I don't, my siblings don't have children. And so when my mother sent me all these pictures of us from our childhood, I thought, who's this going to be left to? Normally most families pass that on to future. I don't have that. My sense of generational continuity is going to fall to people that I don't know, or some that I do and I have relationships with, but maybe it will be through paths that I carve. And that is my mark on the world. And not to say some ego thing about me leaving something, but I think every person wants to be significant in their actions. And they want those actions to have positive consequences, not just for themselves, but for others. And I think it's very important when we get older to know that when we do go, we've done our job.
Yeah.
And we can leave with self-respect, and we can leave with our heads held high, and we can leave knowing that it's somebody else's turn. They're going to take that and they're going to run with it and they're going to do their thing with it. And that's what the life cycle is about, I think.
Yes, David, I totally agree with you, because I think that we're designed, our hearts and our soul are designed to help others, to share our gifts. And when we're sharing our gifts that are honed in, that they have knowledge, they have wisdom, they have experience. And when we're leaning in and we're helping and we're elevating others and we're serving, I mean, we serve. And when you're serving, it actually helps you. Like I always say, like as soon as I'm having a day where maybe, you just kind of get out of bed and all cylinders aren't like energized in the great place. I pick up the phone and I call somebody who I know could really help hearing my voice. It's just become something that I do. Somebody who I know I can uplift, and in me uplifting them and making their day better, I've uplifted myself. I've shifted my own energy. And I think that, when we start teaching that to people and helping people to start having some realization around some of those things, that's when the world becomes a better place. I mean, think about it. If we had a lot of people doing that, I used to say to Zach, who did you give a hand to today? I didn't want to know. Oh, mommy, I got an A on this. Oh, that's really great. But what I listened to more was, who did you help? How would you, what did that look like? And I think, when you embed that in your core values, in your behavioral patterns, in your rituals, that's why I love rituals so much, because so many of my rituals that I've created are really rituals that help other people. And in essence, then it comes back, because everything ricochets, right? There's a ricochet. And I think that's really important. And that's what you talked about today. So we have one last question, and I want to answer that. I want to ask that, because I'm even wondering about that. Like with everything that's going on today in the world, the pandemic, clearly our economy is dropping quickly. We have, loss of economy. We have social unrest. We have this leadership is going to be more important than ever. And, a lot of times the leaders that have been doing really well when everything's booming, I don't know if they're going to have the tool set to lead with everything that's going on. So talk to me a little bit and talk to our audience a little bit about what leadership is good and what you think leadership needs to look like during this situation that we're in?
I think probably the most important thing leaders can do is put themselves in uncomfortable situations with people they don't know. And I think I've told you this kind of goes back to my own history of being the odd man out early on in my life and having to adapt and be thrown into boiling water with people that didn't look or act like me or had my values or anything. And I had to sink or swim. But I really think that that crucible is what creates optimal leadership, because you have to look into somebody else's experience and understand who are they, why do they operate that way, and you hope that they're doing the same with you. Sometimes that doesn't come back, but I think leaders and CEOs and people need to really sit down with people they have historically not sat with and listen to them honestly and with an ear toward, I may hear some things that are going to be difficult for me to hear. I may realize that I have a number of blind spots that I'm not capable of really looking past and understanding. Are they going to want more money from me? Are they going to want, give all that stuff up? Because 9 times out of 10, that's not what they're looking for.
Right.
They're looking to be heard and they're looking to be recognized. They're looking for their identity and their value to be recognized on a basic human level. If you do not do that, you are failing.
Yeah.
You're failing your people. You're failing the test of what that should be. And I think it's so critical to put yourself into unfamiliar circumstances. I mean, look at me. I'm going to a city that's 99% white. Right?
I know.
And but I have to say this about Bozeman, you know, like a lot of people say, what the hell are you going to Montana for? Are you the only black person there? Like, what's it like there for black people? And, you know, when I do see other black people, we all wave at each other because it's like, you know, it's like, hi. And that's kind of a great moment, right? But at the same time, I have to say that everyone there has been unbelievably hospitable and friendly. And I did not pick up one racial vibe there at all. In fact, they were unfailingly kind. And so, and I discovered that even when I went to Oklahoma last year on business. Like, I had this idea about Oklahoma, and then I went there and that was exploded. You have to go to places and to people you don't know. Have conversations, engage them, think differently. Don't talk to the same freaking people that you're comfortable with, because that's a road to nowhere. That's reconfirming your own beliefs. Yeah. And so I think we all have to be willing to like shake the snow globe to maybe come to a different conclusion.
Oh my God. David, I love this talk today. Really, thank you so much for taking time. I mean, in the middle of your crazy move to connect.
No, I feel very privileged that you asked me to do this, and I'm so glad that we've stayed connected down through the years. And you know, we're going to continue to have great dialogues going forward. For sure.
All right, everybody, go on to laviniaerrico.com. There'll be information on there, how you can connect with David. And thanks so much. And we'll see everyone next Wednesday. Remember, we're not meeting this Saturday. No more Saturdays till September. Okay. Thank you, guys. Have a great one. Bye.
Bye.